What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Sloppy Saturdays. And today we are going over the College Football National Championship. Indiana wins the 2026 College Football National Championship. Just like everybody else in the college football world, I am completely shocked, not from yesterday, but from the beginning of this season, from when I started making this podcast, that I am saying Indiana has won the 2026 National Championship. We are in a new age of college football. Indiana exemplifies that you could turn a program around, that most people in college football after today should feel like they have a shot with their program to turn things around in the future. But again, I want to talk about with Indiana how this was arguably the most difficult coaching job we have ever seen in sports by Curt Cignetti, arguably the best turnaround we have ever seen in sports by him, and just how hard it was for this Indiana program to get to this level, how so many things needed to happen. And again, like I said, if you are a Power Four team, if you are competitive in resources, this shows that if you bring in the right guy and have a great transfer portal cycle, this could also be you. This shows how much the playing field has leveled in college football. When we look back 4, 5, 6 years ago, when it's Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, when it's a constant rotation of four teams winning the national championship, where we thought in a sport where there was really no parity, now you could say, hey, this playing field has leveled, and even the teams that were on the outside looking in at the national championship have a shot next year. Absolutely phenomenal what Curt Cignetti and Indiana has done. But I want to also get into how this is not an easy thing by any means, what they have done. And I don't want to give anybody false hope because it was a very difficult route what Indiana and Curt Cignetti did. When Indiana took over, Curt Cignetti took over this Indiana program, we're looking at a team that went 27-2 over 2 seasons when this team was the most losingest program in the Power Four in the entirety of college football. Again, that's what makes this story so great because if Indiana was the losingest program in college football by a Power Four, it really shows that anybody with the right resources that makes the right move has a route to be competitive in college football. When we look at Indiana and Curt Cignetti, when Curt Cignetti got hired coming over from JMU, he went over to the Group of Five from being an assistant coach from Alabama. He wanted to take the hard route to become a head coach in college football. When he was hired, this was by no means a slam dunk hire. Nobody thought at the time that Curt Cignetti was going to take over college football. But again, for a guy that was determined to be an successful head coach at the top of college football, he really adapted in the transfer portal era. When we look at everything that this guy has done, when you look at him having no 5 stars on his roster, he adapted a new philosophy in college football, not only bringing the guys that he had over from JMU and developing them over the course of 3-4 years. He also looked at guys at their surface level and looked at what they could bring at this current moment in college football. This guy, like I said, wasn't looking at 5 stars, incoming high school recruits, and looking at the potential over 3-4 years. He adapted this new age NIL transfer portal philosophy where he was taking in players where he was looking at what could he do for them right now, not their star potential, which is a very difficult thing to do. Again, when we look at national champions from the previous last 5-6 years, you're looking at complete 5 stars. You're looking at guys that were physical freaks coming out of high school that were developed. You're not looking at guys that, again, were 2, 3, 4 stars. And you're looking at again, it's very hard to look at a guy at the surface level and what they could bring for you right now. It's very easy to say, hey, this guy was a physical freak. This guy was going to be a projected first rounder and say, hey, I want him. That's a lot easier than what Curt Cignetti has done. And again, I do want to emphasize that this is great for the sport. This levels out the playing field. This shows that, hey, if this was the losingest program in college football, that anybody could do it, which is true. But I don't want to, again, underestimate how difficult it was for Curt Cignetti and this team to win the national championship and what he's done to turn around this program. Extremely difficult. Yes, you put the right pieces in place. You have a great transfer portal cycle. You're competitive in what you want to, again, do in an offseason compared to other programs. Any Power 4 team can take this route and can be competitive and can not only be in the college football playoffs, they could win a national championship if everything goes right. But it is extremely difficult. And Curt Cignetti hit on a lot of different things, whether it was Fernando Mendoza in the transfer portal, whether it was the guys like Elijah Surratt, Charlie Becker that he developed. Like, again, he hit on a lot of different things, and he saw a lot of different things that other coaches could not see. This is why this is arguably the most impressive national championship we have ever seen. Why it's also so different than other national champions we have ever seen, because when you're looking at, again, an LSU and Alabama, you're looking at the forefront of the talent that they have when you're looking at multiple first-round, second-round picks. This is not that type of team for Indiana. This Indiana team, again, with their depth and being one of the oldest teams we have ever seen win a national championship, they were based on experience, like we said. They were based on 3-4 stars coming into college football and being experienced, being on their fourth year, everybody. And again, even when you look at this defense, we said it throughout the year, this defense was only running 13 men deep. This defense didn't have a lot of depth, but what did they have? They had experience in college football. This was, again, an older team that was ready and prepared for the moment. This was one of the most disciplined teams in college football, and this was one of the most experienced teams in college football. This wasn't a team full of raw talent. And we've seen this team go up against other people. Even when you look at this Miami game, you look at a Ruben Bain, you look at a Mesidor, you look at Mally Toney. Like, they were going up against physical freaks that they didn't necessarily have on this roster. Even, again, them outdueling Ohio State as well. When you go up against a Jeremiah Smith, when you go up against a Cardinal Tate, when you go up against a 5-star quarterback in Julian Sayin, Avril Reese, the list goes on and on. They didn't have those necessarily group of physical talents, first, second-round talents. And, again, you look at Fernando Mendoza. He's going to be the number one pick in the draft. But, again, he climbed up the ranks to become that. And then when you look at maybe at D'Angelo Ponce, he's going to go in the first, second round. And Elijah Surratt may go in the first 3 rounds. But this isn't going to be a team where you look at when you go back 10, 20 years that says, hey, they had all these bunch of first-round talents. This was such an easy route with all the players that they had to develop. Again, there's going to be a lot of people on this Indiana team that may possibly go undrafted or in the 5th, 6th, 7th round of the NFL draft. This was such a different national champion from that aspect as well. And again, like I said, just makes it all the world more impressive for a guy in Curt Cignetti to look at a lot of these players at face value, what they could do for them right now with their experience in college football. Because like I said, it is super easy to look at 5-star talent that everybody wants that are going to be future first-round picks and pick those guys up. But this is why this is the most impressive and influential national championship we have ever seen in college football. Now, I do also want to say as well, and this is a big thing I have in college football, I do want people to look back at this national championship team. And again, like I said, with guys like Fernando Mendoza, D'Angelo Pound, Elijah Surratt, those are going to be high NFL draft picks. Those are going to be guys that do have the opportunity to be really successful NFL guys. And I hope all these guys in Indiana do get NFL opportunities and become successful in the NFL. But I don't want people to look back at this Indiana team and say, oh, a Charlie Becker was all right. Or, oh, a Kalen Black, Roman Hemby were all right, because they didn't have the NFL careers or the NFL, again, draft capital. I want people to really look at this Indiana team 10, 20 years from now and look at the core that they had. Again, Omar Cooper, a ton of guys, and say, hey, these guys were really great, even though, again, they may have not panned out in the NFL. I hope people don't look back on this team and say, hey, this guy was all right, because they weren't first-round NFL talents. This was a different type of team, and why it was all the more so impressive. Now, I do want to get into the national championship as well. Again, we talk about the route Indiana took, phenomenal. Something Curt Cignetti was really the pioneer in this NIL New Age transfer portal. And again, when we made this podcast, like I said, 2 years ago, we discussed how the playing field was going to level out. Nobody thought it was going to be this quick, where we see a bottom of the barrel Power 14 elevate all the way to the top in a national champion. Again, I could talk on and on again how this gave so many people so much hope. But I do want to talk about the national championship game. When we look at a team in Miami, if I'm a Miami fan, again, if I go to the school in Miami, I got to be very disappointed in this loss, because you were as close as you could possibly be. And I thought Miami, from both lines of scrimmage, from the D line, how much pressure they put on Fernando Mendoza, how they truly put him in a blender. I know this team only had 3 sacks in this game, but that does not really show the amount of pressure that was on Fernando Mendoza. When we look at a Mesidor and we look at a Ruben Bain, they were constantly in Fernando Mendoza's face all night. And then when we look on the flip side of Miami, the protection that they were getting for Carson Beck, I thought, again, they dominated that side of the ball as well. So they dominated on both sides of the trenches. And we said for Miami, again, whether it was in different matchups, whether it was in the national champion, if you are great in the trenches, you could stick in any game. And this is what Miami did. And when you look at the offensive side of the ball as well, their 2 most valuable offensive weapons stood out and had the best games they could possibly have. When we look at Mark Fletcher, 17 carries, 112 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had a touchdown run that was 57 yards that he completely escaped. Then when we look at Malachi Tony as well, Malachi Tony, I believe they used him so well in this game. Whether you look at the screen pass late, whether you look at the touch pass late, they were able to get him 10 receptions for 122 yards. He had a long of 41 yards. He made spectacular catches in this game. This is why if I was Miami, I would be so disappointed, because you dominated in the trenches. Your top 4 players played to their best of the abilities, and you still didn't win. And you were so close on that last drive. But again, when I look at Miami losing this game, I have to point out a couple of things. I think the first reason why Miami lost this game, because again, we had to talk about if Miami was going to beat Indiana, and what everybody was saying, it had to be a clean football game. It had to be a football game where you weren't going to make mistakes. Because we saw, and like we highlighted in the beginning of this episode, Indiana was arguably the most disciplined team we have ever seen in college football from a national champion. So it was influential that you could not make mistakes. But Miami didn't make mistakes. I think this game really came down to, and I know it came a little early in the game, and I know Miami did have a chance late. I think it really comes down to the block punt. When we look at Miami, when we look at Indiana, both teams struggled moving the ball for the first half of this game. Both teams struggled moving the ball for basically the entirety of this game. Again, we saw a lot of big plays, like a Mark Fletcher big play. But when you look at that block punt, that could be the difference in a 6-point game, where you made that mistake on special teams that we know Indiana was not making that mistake. I thought that was the biggest play of this game. When that happened, when you give, again, an 8-point favorite a special teams turnover in a game that's so tight like this, I thought that was the big difference in this game. Then when we also look at Carson Beck, we had to say Carson Beck would have to play his best game in this game. We would have to see the Carson Beck that's consistent downfield, and that was not the case as well. When we look at Miami, Miami had a chance at the end of this game to win this game. Again, against a prevent defense, they were driving down the field. They began deep. They went into Indiana territory. But again, when you look at Carson Beck, the throw he made downfield, and big mistake downfield. Did he have a window possibly to make that throw? Yes, it was a very tight window. There were 2 Indiana defenders there, and Carson Beck ultimately makes the mistake that ends Miami's season. Why I think this is such a big thing for Miami, not only did you dominate in the trenches, not did you get to their quarterback more than they got to yours, and you protected your quarterback better than they got to yours. Your 4 guys, like I said, played to the best of their ability. I thought Miami had a phenomenal game plan. I thought Miami was right there. I would be extremely disappointed if I was a Miami fan. But like I said, those 2 mistakes, the special team mistake and Carson Beck throwing this interception, is really what you look at on why Indiana won this game. And when you look at the reverse side of Indiana, Indiana was a team, again, Fernando Mendoza was in a blender for the majority of this game. He was getting pressured more than I think he has possibly ever got pressured this whole entire season. But I thought this was the most impressive game for me for Fernando Mendoza. And you may be saying, the most impressive game? He only had, again, 186 yards. He was 16 for 27. He put in no touchdowns. Again, you can look at games where Fernando Mendoza has torn it up as a passer. But the one thing I have said of Fernando Mendoza for a majority of this season is the pressure has been clean up front. Outside of the Ohio State game, they have been protecting Fernando Mendoza pretty well, and he has been making all the throws. But when I look at Fernando Mendoza in this game in key moments, when you look at a 3rd down throw, a 4th down throw to the back shoulder of Charlie Becker, in those key moments, despite Fernando Mendoza getting hit all game, he came up alive. And then what everybody wants to talk about, the fourth down play where an Indiana team looked very flustered and they call a QB run, a QB draw with a Fernando Mendoza. Again, this isn't a Johnny Manziel. This isn't a Cam Newton. This was a draw from a guy that isn't the most mobile quarterback. And when we look at that play and when we look at this Indiana team in 10, 15, 20 years, you're going to look at that running play. And then you're obviously going to look at, with this Heisman season, the play against Penn State with Omar Cooper, that throw as well. But those are the two plays. That was the play of Fernando Mendoza's season. Again, that showed guts. And like I said, you can look at the two back shoulder throws to Charlie Becker, and you can look at that run. Fernando Mendoza in the key moments came alive. Those were the differences for me in this game. Like I said, a Charlie Becker really rose up to the occasion. I also think, like I said, the most dangerous thing about this Indiana team is how diverse they are in the amount of ways they could win. Like I said, Fernando Mendoza only completed 16 passes in this game. But what did Indiana do? Their rushing attack ran the ball 45 times for 131 yards. Again, that is something you really have to look back on when you look at, again, Fernando Mendoza, was it getting it going? When this was the guy that had it going all season, when they were constantly in his face, they lean on their running backs. Their running backs rushed the ball, carried the ball over 30 times. That's something you can look at. And again, when we talked about this Indiana team being disciplined, having no turnovers in a championship game where they were getting dominated in the trenches and they were able to run the football over 30 times, it just showed what we have been showing, that we've been saying all season. This Indiana team could win in a variety of different ways, and they did that. Now, again, like I said, when you look at Miami, them dominating the trenches, them four best players having the best game, and their offensive front on the offensive line protecting Carson Beck, why I would also be so disappointed if I was a Miami fan, because you're going to see a Miami team this year, very similar to last year, having a ton of turnover. When you look at a Ruben Bain, and when you look at a Mesidor, and when you look at 3-4 offensive linemen on his offensive front, those are all guys that you aren't going to have next year. So again, when they played their best game in the national championship and you came short, it's even more sour because you don't know how it's going to turn out next year with the amount of turnover they have. But again, when you look at Miami, when you look at Indiana, they are bringing in two new quarterbacks, top of the transfer portal, in Darren Mensah, in Josh Hoover. They also are adding other pieces as well. You see Indiana bringing in a Nick Marsh. What I want to see for the future of college football and how I'm going to end off this video is I want to see if it is possible for a team like Miami, like Indiana, to have three different quarterbacks in 3 different years and to continue to follow the new age of college football, this transfer portal, this NIL method of bringing in a new core almost every year. Can you consistently make these deep runs and make these national championship appearances for 2-3 consecutive years with new cores at huge positions? Or is there going to be a sense of chemistry, a sense of camaraderie, a sense of buildup in these teams where you're going to have the same guys at key positions for 2-3 years? Or can you consistently keep flipping these rosters at key positions? That's what I want to see. But when we look at Miami, when we look at Indiana, these are two teams that really embody the new age of college football. Like I said, have 3 different quarterbacks for 3 different years, and that's why they're in this spot. That wraps up this episode of College Football. Drop down again. Phenomenal season. Your thoughts on the national championship. Your thought on the new age of college football. How much these teams embodied the NIL, the transfer portal. And drop down below, like I said, how you think these teams are going to fare next year. That wraps up this episode of Sloppy Saturdays. This college football season comes to an end. Arguably the most excited college football season we have ever seen with the parity. And we are out.